Let's begin with a truth that rarely gets spoken out loud. No one is born antisocial. Not a single baby enters this world hardwired to avoid connection, to distrust people, or to crave distance over closeness. What we often describe as an antisocial personality is usually not a personality at all. It's a strategy, a deeply intelligent, emotional, and often unconscious psychological response to pain, to betrayal, to being misunderstood. It's not the way someone is. It's the way someone became in order to survive. Now let's be clear. Some people are naturally more reserved, more introverted, more introspective. They may prefer depth over small talk or solitude over noise. But that is not the same as isolation. Being introverted isn't the same as being emotionally barricaded. What we're talking about here is something far more subtle and far more painful. A mask that looks like independence but feels like invisibility. A role that protects you from hurt but also keeps you from being seen. Imagine this. A child steps into a room full of kids and tries to join the group. Their voice is shaky but hopeful. They reach out and the group laughs. Or a teenager, heart-pounding, finally says something honest in class, something vulnerable. And the silence that follows cuts deeper than mockery. Or a young adult, after weeks of building trust, opens up to someone they care about. And that person betrays it, breaks it, vanishes. These are not movie-level traumas, but they cut. They're moments where something inside quietly whispers, "This hurts. Let's not do that again." And so slowly the person doesn't even notice. They start to shift, to withdraw. They stop showing up. They dodge invites with excuses like, "I'm tired," or "maybe next time." They reply to texts later, then not at all. They eat alone but call it me time. They tell themselves and others they prefer to be alone. That people are exhausting, that life is easier this way. And maybe it is. At first, because not trying means not getting hurt. Because silence means no one can reject you. Because hiding means you don't have to risk being seen and misunderstood. Again. But what starts as protection quickly hardens into identity. The lines between "I don't want to go out tonight" and "I don't do people" blur. Until one day, you forget there ever was a difference. And here's where the mask forms. It's not a physical thing. You don't consciously choose to put it on. It's more like an atmosphere you carry, an emotional armor. It says, "I'm fine. I don't need anyone. I'm good on my own." But underneath those words, there's a quiet ache you don't speak aloud. A dull, persistent longing to be known, to be chosen, to be seen. This is where the paradox begins, because on the outside, you look composed, maybe even powerful. You're the one who doesn't rely on anyone. You've mastered independence, you avoid the chaos of social drama, you're self-sufficient. But inside, a different story unfolds, one full of contradiction. Because the longer you wear the mask, the more you start to lose track of the self underneath it. You don't even know if you like being alone anymore, or if you're just afraid of what connection might cost. You don't even know if you actually believe people are shallow, or if that belief is just safer than giving them another chance. The mask becomes so fused with your identity that removing it feels impossible. Not because it's glued on, but because what's underneath it has grown soft, unfamiliar, and tender from disuse. And that's when the loneliness hits hardest. Not the kind of loneliness you feel when you're physically by yourself, but the kind of loneliness you feel when you're with people and still hiding. When you laugh, but only with half your heart. When you listen, but never share. When you show up, but not fully. This is the loneliness of being unseen, not because no one is looking, but because you've trained yourself to remain invisible. It's not just sad. It's isolating on a level that words rarely reach. Because here's the twist. You don't even let yourself see you anymore. You've buried your wants beneath logic. You've buried your vulnerability beneath strength. You've buried your desire for connection beneath narratives like, "I'm just different. I've outgrown all that. People never really get me." And maybe all of those are partly true, but more often than not, they're stories you've written to justify the walls you've built. And the mask? It talks. It tells you what to do whenever you get too close to honesty. When you think of reaching out, what if they think you're desperate? When you want to ask for support, you should be able to handle this alone. When you feel the urge to laugh, cry, or care, tone it down. You're being too much. Every time you take one step toward connection, the mask pulls you 2 steps back with fear. And here's what's terrifying. It works. You stay safe, but you stay alone. Because connection, real connection, can't exist behind a mask. It can't grow in silence. It doesn't bloom in perfection. It thrives in vulnerability, in messiness, in mutual risk. But that's exactly what the mask was built to avoid. So the longer you wear it, the more isolated you become. And the more isolated you become, the more you convince yourself that you need the mask to survive. It's a trap, a loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy that says, "I don't need anyone," but secretly aches for someone to see through that lie. "I'm not lonely," while watching others connect and feeling like a ghost in the room. I'm just built differently. When really, you were hurt differently. And the most dangerous part? You start to believe it. You confuse protection for identity, defense for truth, fear for freedom. But none of those are who you really are, because underneath it all, in the silence, the sarcasm, the self-proclaimed independence, there is a voice. A small, trembling voice that remembers a time before the mask. A time when you laughed without checking yourself. When you reached out without fear. When connection felt like home. Not a battlefield. That voice is still there. And it's waiting. Not for a perfect friend group. Not for the right moment. But for you. To pause. To notice. To admit. This isn't working anymore. That honesty, quiet, private, even painful, is where everything starts to change. Because once you see the mask for what it is, something you built, you also realize something even more powerful. You can unbuild it. And no, that doesn't mean becoming the life of the party overnight. It doesn't mean you have to just put yourself out there or force yourself into connections that feel fake. It means asking different questions. What if solitude is no longer peace but avoidance? What if the role I've been playing is costing me more than it's protecting me? What if I'm not broken, just scared? And what if just maybe healing doesn't mean becoming someone else, but remembering who you were before you became a stranger to yourself? In the first part of this journey, we peeled back the layers of the antisocial mask, how a role built for safety gradually replaces authenticity, how loneliness hides in the folds of independence, and how silence, though comforting, becomes a slow, burning ache. But to truly understand why this mask becomes so difficult to remove, we need to go even deeper. Not into the face the world sees, but into the battlefield of the mind itself. Because behind the scenes of withdrawal and emotional distance, there's a war unfolding. And this war has a name: the double bind. A psychological trap so subtle, so internal, that most people caught inside it don't even realize they're stuck. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream. It whispers. Quietly. Relentlessly. Reach out. No, don't. They'll laugh at you. You're alone. But that's because you're better than them. The double bind is like being torn in two opposite directions, both driven by survival. You crave connection but recoil from it. You long to be seen, but fear what will happen when you are. You ache to belong but tell yourself you don't need anyone. This isn't indecision. It's not mood swings. It's structure. It's pattern. It's strategy. And at the core of this strategy are two of the most potent emotional forces in human psychology: shame and superiority. Let's begin with shame, the shadow that follows us from childhood into every adult interaction. Shame is not guilt. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame goes deeper. It says, I am the mistake. For someone who's retreated behind the mask of antisocial identity, shame is the first emotion that flares up whenever they think of opening up. It's the invisible slap that comes before the words ever leave their mouth. What if they think you're weak? What if you get ignored again? What if you need more than they're willing to give? Shame makes vulnerability feel not just scary, but existentially dangerous. It tells you that revealing yourself will not only invite rejection, but prove something you've always feared: that you were never worthy to begin with. So, you armor up. You smile instead of speaking up. You laugh off things that hurt. You change the subject when conversation gets too close to your heart. You deflect compliments. You hide sadness under sarcasm. You say, I'm just tired, when what you really mean is, I'm drowning. And this works on crux at first, but something insidious happens over time. The longer you hide, the more convinced you become that hiding is necessary, not optional, not strategic, but essential to survival. And as shame deepens, it begins to contour your entire personality. You stop considering connection not just because it might hurt, but because you don't believe you deserve it. But here's the twist. Shame alone can't hold this fortress together, because shame makes you feel small, and no human being can tolerate feeling small forever. So the mind searches for an antidote, something that can neutralize the pain of unworthiness. And this is when the second force enters: superiority. Superiority whispers the exact opposite of shame. Where shame says, you're not enough, superiority says, they're not enough. You start building stories to protect yourself from the ache of exclusion. I don't need those kinds of people. They're too shallow to understand me. I've evolved beyond surface-level friendships. Most people just aren't interesting. They're fake. I'm real. These narratives are comforting. They allow you to feel elevated instead of excluded, independent instead of isolated, discerning instead of dismissed. And let's be honest, sometimes those stories do have a seed of truth. Maybe you have outgrown certain dynamics. Maybe you do crave deeper conversations. Maybe the world around you is too noisy, too fast, too performative. But in the context of the double bind, these insights aren't neutral observations. They're defense mechanisms. Superiority becomes a cloak. It gives you something shame never could: dignity. But it comes at a cost, because that cloak also cuts you off from empathy, from humility, from risk, from the very things that allow for real connection. And now, with both forces in full swing, Shame dragging you down, superiority pushing others away. You are stuck in a loop. Shame says, don't reach out, you'll look desperate. Superiority says, don't reach out, they're not worth it. And so you reach out to no one. Shame says, if they really knew you, they'd leave. Superiority says, you've already left them behind. And so you show no one your truth. This is not a conflict, it's a stalemate, a psychic freeze. You can't go forward because vulnerability feels like a trap. You can't go backward because you've convinced yourself you're beyond needing anyone. And so you orbit around your own needs without ever touching them. You want to be seen, but only if you can control the outcome. You want to belong, but only if you don't have to risk not belonging. You want to be close, but only if the other person guarantees you'll never feel abandoned again. But real life doesn't work that way. And the result of this double bind is emotional paralysis. You talk yourself out of every instinct to connect. You scan every interaction for potential disappointment. You reject others before they can reject you. And what makes this even more dangerous is its invisibility. Because after enough time living in this pattern, the double bind doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like your personality. You start to say things like, I'm just not a people person. I don't really do friendships. I prefer to be alone. These aren't lies. They're simplifications, condensed summaries of years spent protecting yourself. But deep down, there's another voice, quiet, almost imperceptible, on that knows. That knows your so-called independence might be loneliness in a clever disguise. That knows your silence isn't peace. It's fear wearing the mask of calm. That knows you don't actually feel superior. You just don't know how to feel safe. This realization is painful because it means the very strategies that once kept you afloat are now pulling you under. It means the stories you've told yourself about who you are, what you need, what you're above, might be outdated armor. And worst of all, it means that every moment you almost chose connection, you almost said the vulnerable thing, you almost reached out, you almost let someone in, was a moment stolen, not by other people, but by your own defense mechanisms. So what's the way out? It doesn't begin with self-shaming. You can't bully yourself into connection. And it doesn't begin with destroying your defenses, because those defenses once saved you. The path forward starts with a quieter kind of truth, one that says, I see what I've built. I see how I've protected myself. I see how I've gotten stuck. And I'm willing, just willing, to try something new. That willingness is not weakness. It's the return of agency. Because shame and superiority are not your enemies. They are outdated guardians. They showed up when you needed them. But they are no longer the only voices that get to speak. You can thank them, and then gently choose something else. Not instant vulnerability, not forced connection, but the smallest gesture of self-reclamation. Texting someone back. Speaking up even if your voice shakes. Saying, I miss this, or I'm scared, or I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. These aren't grand gestures, they're doorways. Doorways back to your own aliveness, back to your capacity to relate. Back to the part of you that never stopped hoping, even under all that armor. And once you walk through those doorways, even a crack at a time, something shifts. You realize that safety is not the absence of risk. It's the presence of choice. By now, we've looked at the mask, how it's built, how it becomes mistaken for identity, and we've explored the double bind, the inner tug of war between shame and superiority that keeps us frozen. But even if you see these forces clearly, even if you recognize the prison you're in, escaping it is still not easy. Because there's one more layer to this defense system. One final illusion that keeps you stuck. The fantasy of perfect safety. Most people trapped in chronic loneliness aren't only afraid of connection. They're searching for something impossible. Connection without vulnerability, intimacy without uncertainty, relationship without risk. Let's be honest. At some point, you've probably told yourself something like this. I'll open up when I feel more ready. I'll reach out when I know they'll respond. I'll let someone in, but only when I'm sure I won't be hurt. These don't sound unreasonable on the surface. They sound cautious, wise even. But what they really are, underneath all the logic, is fear in disguise. Because readiness, certainty, guarantees, they never come. What's really happening here is that your mind has created a standard for connection that no real relationship can ever meet. One where you're never misunderstood, never embarrassed, never rejected, never awkward, never disappointed. You're asking for risk-free intimacy, and that doesn't exist. This perfectionistic standard acts like a silent filter through which you evaluate every potential interaction. Someone texts you but takes a while to reply? Red flag. You talk to a new person and feel unsure afterward? Must mean they didn't like you. A friend doesn't reach out first? Proof that they don't care. In reality, none of these events are signs of danger. But when you're in self-protection mode, every uncertainty feels like proof. Every tiny discomfort becomes a justification to retreat. And that's the real danger. The more you wait for safety, the more life passes you by. You're not just avoiding people. You're avoiding the actual experience of relationship. You become a spectator in your own social life. imagining how things might go, but rarely letting them happen. It's not that you're antisocial. It's that you're stuck in rehearsal, always preparing, never performing, and this rehearsal can last for years. You imagine what it would be like to be seen, to be part of a group, to fall in love, to share a messy laugh, to be missed, to matter. But imagination becomes a substitute for action. You dream of connection, but the moment it gets real, your defenses activate. You tell yourself, not now. I need more time. I need to feel more confident. And confidence, which is only built through doing, it never arrives. Here's the hard truth. Every real relationship involves discomfort. It's not a glitch. It's a feature. Why? Because real people are unpredictable. They come with their own fears, their own patterns, their own inconsistencies. And so do you. That means connection will always be messy. Sometimes you'll talk too much. Sometimes you'll say the wrong thing. Sometimes they won't understand you. Sometimes you won't understand them. And that's okay. But if your nervous system has grown used to equating unpredictability with danger, then even minor awkwardness can feel intolerable. So what do? You aim for control. You try to curate interactions like you're editing a photo, cropping, filtering, deleting, retaking. But connection isn't a selfie. It's a mirror. You can't stage it. You can only show up for it. And showing up, by definition, means risking the very things your mask was built to avoid: imperfection, awkwardness, vulnerability. You might be thinking, but why would I ever risk getting hurt again? Fair question. And here's the answer. Because avoiding pain isn't the same as finding peace. Avoidance creates a temporary calm, but it comes at the cost of long-term nourishment. It's like staying inside to avoid the rain, only to realize you've missed every season of your life. And the longer you wait for a safe moment to connect, the more disconnected you become. Not just from others, but from yourself. From the version of you that used to reach out. The one who used to hope. The one who still wants to be held. The one who, even now, is watching from behind the curtain of your caution, whispering, "Please, let me out." But you don't, because that voice feels too risky, too raw, too real. So instead, you scroll past old photos, watch people laugh from a distance, replay old conversations in your mind, wonder if you missed your chance. Then reassure yourself, it's fine, I don't need them anyway. But there's a moment, maybe late at night, maybe after seeing someone you used to know, where that armor cracks. And for a second, you don't feel superior, you don't feel numb, you feel exactly what's underneath. Lonely. Not lonely because you're alone, but lonely because you haven't let yourself be known. And that ache, the one you've tried to rationalize, suppress, outgrow, is still there. Not because something's wrong with you, but because your deepest wiring hasn't changed. You are still a relational being, still made for closeness, still longing to be held, seen, heard, understood. And no amount of self-sufficiency can delete that truth. Here's where the real shift begins. Not with forcing yourself into social situations, not with pretending to be an extrovert, not with perfecting your communication skills, but with one internal decision: to stop waiting for guarantees. Let that land. You will never be completely ready. People will never be completely safe. You will never be completely in control. And that's okay, because connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. It asks for your real self, not the edited one, not the rehearsed one. Just the one that's here now, flawed, scared, still trying. And when you finally accept that uncertainty is part of the process, something remarkable happens. You become free. Not from risk, but from the illusion that avoiding risk will save you. You start saying yes to imperfect invitations. You start replying to texts you used to ignore. You start joining the group even if you feel out of place. You start practicing being human in public. And yes, you'll fumble. Yes, you'll feel awkward. Yes, your voice will shake. But also, yes, you'll be alive. Yes, you'll be seen. Yes, you'll remember what it's like to matter. Not because you were flawless, but because you were real. And that is the antidote to the fantasy of risk-free connection. Not confidence, not control, not certainty, but the courage to try anyway. Having journeyed through the complex psychology of antisocial loneliness, understanding the protective mask of independence, the inner battle between shame and superiority, and the illusory quest for a risk-free connection, the critical question remains: how can someone truly break free from this isolating loop and rediscover genuine connection and authentic self-expression? The honest truth is that there is no instant fix, no magic bullet, no simple step that immediately dissolves years, sometimes decades, of emotional conditioning and self-protective habits. Instead, the path forward is a long, often challenging process requiring patience, courage, and a deep willingness to face uncertainty and vulnerability head-on. At the heart of this transformation lies a paradoxical but crucial concept: self-betrayal. Now, this word often triggers discomfort or misunderstanding. When we hear betrayal, we usually think of hurting others or being hurt by them. But here, self-betrayal means something very different. It is the deliberate choice to act against the identity and protective persona, the mask, that has long served as your shield from pain, rejection, and humiliation. This mask was built over time to protect you when social life felt unpredictable and dangerous. It was your fortress in the face of exclusion, mockery, or invisibility. But today, that same mask acts like a prison, locking you inside isolation and blocking you from real, nourishing relationships. To move forward, you must be willing to betray that mask. This means consciously stepping into behaviors and experiences that contradict the story you have told yourself about who you are and what you need. It means choosing vulnerability even when it feels frightening. It means allowing yourself to be seen, with all your messiness, uncertainty, and imperfection, instead of hiding behind layers of detachment and indifference. What might acts of self-betrayal look like in everyday life? Sending a message you almost deleted, despite the fear of seeming needy. Admitting out loud, or at least to yourself, that you feel lonely instead of pretending you're fine. Asking for support or companionship even if it feels awkward or uncomfortable. Attending a social event despite wanting to retreat and hide. Expressing emotions that you've long suppressed because they might reveal vulnerability. Each deliberate act of self-betrayal is an act of courage. A small but radical choice to step out of the protective shadows and into the light of human connection. Because when you betray the mask, you are not just risking external rejection or embarrassment, you're also risking the internal discomfort of dismantling the very identity that, for so long, has defined your sense of self and kept you safe. Yet here is the crucial insight. Every act of self-betrayal weakens the mask's hold. With every step into vulnerability, you start to reclaim parts of yourself that have been buried under layers of fear and protection. Your authentic emotions, your true needs, and your natural capacity for intimacy begin to breathe again. You don't become a different person. You rediscover who you were before the world taught you to hide. The journey is rarely linear. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the urge to retreat feels overwhelming. Old fears will resurface, and you might long for the comfort of your mask's familiar protection. But every intentional act of self-betrayal chips away at the walls of isolation and brings you closer to freedom. Over time, these choices build something profound. Agency. Agency is your ability to choose how you show up in the world, independent of fear or past conditioning. It's the capacity to act despite uncertainty, discomfort, or the risk of rejection. Agency is vulnerability in motion, the willingness to be present, to be seen, to take emotional risks without being defined by the outcomes. Agency transforms loneliness into connection. When you cultivate agency, you embrace imperfection and uncertainty. You learn to say, I'm not okay, but I'm here anyway. You risk speaking even if you might stumble. You allow yourself to belong even if it feels unsafe. This ongoing practice of showing up, messy, flawed, and human, builds something invaluable: trust. Trust that you can be accepted despite your imperfections. Trust that you can survive vulnerability and pain. Trust that real relationships aren't about perfection, but about shared humanity. Trust breaks the double bind of shame and superiority. It rewrites the narratives you've been telling yourself for so long. You can belong even if you are not perfect. You can be seen without being destroyed. You can connect even when things feel messy and uncertain. This new story rewires your experience of loneliness itself. Loneliness is not merely being physically alone, it is the feeling of being unseen. As you reclaim agency and shed the mask, you begin to see others differently, and not as threats, but as fellow humans longing to belong. You approach relationships with curiosity instead of fear. You create bonds that are imperfect, real, and deeply fulfilling. But here is a vital truth. Connection is not a destination, but a lifelong imperfect practice. It is a dance of reaching out and retreating, of vulnerability and protection, of hope and disappointment. You will succeed sometimes and fail at others. That is part of what it means to be human. Yet each time you show up without perfect armor or a rehearsed script, you take a step closer to freedom and belonging. So where do you start? Here are 3 practical steps to begin this transformation. Identify and name the mask. Write down the roles, stories, and defenses you use to avoid connection. See them clearly for what they are: emotional strategies, not truths or flaws. Practice deliberate self-betrayal daily. Choose one small act that contradicts your mask. Send a message, admit loneliness, ask for help, show up somewhere. Each action chips away at isolation. Cultivate compassionate presence. When shame or superiority arise, don't fight or judge them. Observe them kindly. Remind yourself they are defenses, not facts. Treat yourself with patience and care. Healing from antisocial loneliness is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who you were before fear shaped your identity, the part of you that still longs for love, belonging, and connection. With every step forward, you are not alone. Many have walked this path before you. Many walk it now. It's messy, imperfect, sometimes painful, and deeply human. Take a breath, choose agency, step into uncertainty, and open the door, even if just a crack, to connection. On the other side of fear, you will find not just others, but yourself. If you found this helpful, please share your thoughts below. Your courage might inspire others, and if there are topics you want explored with this kind of depth, leave your suggestions. Remember, true connection begins within. Let's walk this path together.